To be a monarch, you need certain things: an army, a stronghold, money. But you also need certain trappings, symbols of your power and authority. These are your so-called honors, and naturally you keep them very well guarded. But what happens when your enemies get the upper hand? When they decide you need to go, and your precious ancient symbols of power, handed down to you from ancient times, are only fit for the scrap heap? Well, someone is going to need to do something very drastic. This is the chaotic story of the honors of Scotland. First, some backstory. For over 1,000 years, the kings of Scotland have used special regalia in their coronations. The first recorded instance we have dates back to the reign of King Edgar the Valiant in the 11th century. When we are talking about the official honors of Scotland, we're talking about these items. So first, the crown. A crown is the most obvious symbol of a monarch, right? It represents their sovereignty, which is usually considered to be flowing from divine authority. You can think of a medieval crown as sort of a cosplay halo, in a sense. The crown of Scotland was worn by monarchs when they were coronated, obviously. It's believed that until the mid-16th century, this crown was a circlet style. Then it was replaced by an imperial style. Imperial crowns are recognized by their arches around the exterior that meet at the top, usually in some form of a jeweled globe and a cross. In 1540, James V ordered the creation of a new crown to replace the aging and damaged circlet. This remodel was completed by the royal goldsmith John Mossman. Mossman's creation used 22 jewels and 22 precious gemstones from the original crown, as well as a large number of freshwater Scottish pearls. It weighed around 1.64 kilograms, that's about 3.6 pounds. This crown was first used by James V in the same year for his consort's coronation at Holyrood. Now, the second honor of Scotland is the Sword of State. Swords of state are strictly decorative. They represent the monarch's authority and obligation to defend the realm. This particular ceremonial sword was first presented to James IV by Pope Julius II in 1507. Thus, it is sometimes also known as the Papal Sword. The sword features a silver gilt handle decorated with oak leaves and acorns. The blade is over 4.5 feet long. The final honor we're talking about is the scepter. Scepters are sort of ritualized, artistic renditions of battle maces and represent the monarch's authority to rule, judge, and punish. Also, a papal gift, the Scottish scepter dates back to around 1494. It's believed that it was probably given to James IV by Pope Alexander VI. The ornate mace features a crystalline globe, images of the Virgin Mary, St. Andrew, and etched dolphins. Who doesn't like dolphins? Scotland's honours were first used together in 1543 at the coronation of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was just 9 months old at the time. They would also be used in the coronation of James VI in 1567 and Charles I in 1633, who were both kings of Scotland as well as England. Now, as you may know, Charles I's reign marked a tumultuous time in Britain, to say the least. This period of the English Civil War and the greater conflict known as the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. These braided tragedies ultimately resulted in massive destruction and the deaths of around 500,000 civilians and soldiers throughout the British Isles. And this included King Charles himself, executed in the name of freedom from tyranny. The new government set up was the Commonwealth of England, a unitary republic that included Ireland and Scotland as well. Scotland's Presbyterian Covenanters had been instrumental allies in the war, in fact. The goal was a pure, righteous Puritan nation that would be just and holy. Naturally, it almost immediately descended into totalitarian intolerance and extremism. Ultimately, it was ruled by General Oliver Cromwell, the so-called Lord Protector of the realm, and arguably the first modern military dictator in history. But the fever pitch of the Commonwealth's zealotry didn't exactly sit well with everyone. At the time of his execution in 1649, King Charles's son was in hiding in the Netherlands. In Scotland, meanwhile, the regicide was viewed as crossing the line. And more so, the Covenanters were realizing that the English-led Commonwealth was probably not going to be such a good deal after all. Their solution? Proclaim the Prince in exile King of Scotland, Charles II. For Cromwell and his regime, this was a major threat, and they moved immediately. Calling up his battle-hardened and wickedly efficient New Model army, Cromwell launched a preemptive invasion of Scotland. Charles II must not be crowned. And the honours of Scotland, those most potent symbols of Scottish nationhood, must be destroyed. This bloody second stage of the conflict saw Cromwell occupy the lowlands, including Edinburgh. But seemingly against the odds, the coronation of Charles II was held at Scone in 1651. Before Cromwell took control, the honours had been rushed out of Edinburgh for use in the ceremony. Unable to return them to their home, the royalist leader George Ogilvy of Barra took them to Dunnottar Castle outside of Aberdeen. The Republicans weren't about to give up, though. Charles escaped to France, but their spies found out about Dunnottar. The English army laid siege. Inside, a Scottish skeleton crew of only 70 men were holed up. For 8 long months, these defenders held out, but it was clearly just a matter of time before the castle fell. After all, a fortress built to withstand trebuchets just could not withstand modern cannon fire. The garrison was faced with a stark choice: either surrender the honours and see them pulverized just like the crown jewels of England had been, or pull off the reversed heist of the century. They chose the latter. There are 2 main theories for how the honours were smuggled out of the castle. The first is simple. A washerwoman hid them under her rags and linens in a cart and simply left by the front door. The other, more popular theory, is the exciting one. Dunnottar Castle is situated on a craggy headland that juts out into the Atlantic. As the story goes, the honours were placed one by one in a bucket and lowered by rope out a tower window to the rocky beach far below. Here, they were collected and hidden under a mound of seaweed. The sword of state, however, was too long to be put in the bucket, and so they had to break it in half. Braving the dark and storm, Scottish agents carried the treasure south along the shore to the Kirk of Kinneff, just a few miles away. Here, their care was entrusted to one Reverend James Granier and his wife. The couple buried the honours under the pulpit of the church. Dunnottar was the last Scottish castle to hold out against the Republicans. When it finally fell, Ogilvy and his family were ordered to hand over the regalia under threat of torture. Instead, they spun a tale that their relatives had long since carried the honours off to France. And in fact, the smuggling of the honours had never been Ogilvy's idea in the first place, so he actually didn't know what had happened to them. The secret was kept for over 8 years, until the restoration of Charles II to the English throne in 1660. Bit of a happy ending there, right? Well, for the next 40 or so years, the honours were used for official occasions as normal by the kings of Scotland. But this all came to an abrupt end in 1707, when the Acts of Union led to the creation of Great Britain. No need for the regalia of an extinct monarchy, right? At least, that's what the English thought. So the honours were thrown into a chest and stashed away in the dust of Edinburgh Castle. It would be over 100 years before the honours would see the light of day again. In 1818, none other than the great Sir Walter Scott himself uncovered the honours. Scott was serving as the governor of Edinburgh Castle and took it upon himself to find the missing artifacts. He later wrote,
"My dear Croker, I have the pleasure to assure you the regalia of Scotland were this day found in perfect preservation. The sword of state and sceptre showed marks of hard usage at some former period, but in all respects agree with the description in Thomson's work. The extreme solemnity of opening the sealed doors of oak and iron and finally breaking open a chest which has been shut since March 7th, 1707, gave sort of interest to our researchers, which I can hardly express to you. It would be very difficult to describe the intense eagerness with which we watched the rising of the lid of the chest and progress of the workmen breaking it open. The sword of state is a most beautiful piece of workmanship. The scabbard is richly decorated with filigree work of silver, double gilded, representing oak leaves and acorns, executed in a taste worthy that classical age in which the arts revived. The discovery of the regalia has interested people's minds much more strongly than I expected, and certainly calculated to make a pleasant and favorable impression upon them."
Since Scott's discovery, the honours have been on public display in Edinburgh Castle as he had wished. Today, anyone can view these incredible pieces of history. That is with one exception. In 1941, the honors were actually again buried in secret to protect them from the Blitz and a feared German invasion. This time they were separated, just in case, and scattered around the grounds of Edinburgh Castle. They were returned to their rightful place following the end of the war. And actually, we still haven't been completely honest with you. You see, the original Sword of State was actually recently retired. In 2022, during preparations for the coronation of Charles III, the papal sword was deemed far too fragile for ceremonial use. So, a new sword was commissioned. This new and breathtaking piece is named the Elizabeth Sword in honor of the former queen. It's made entirely of Scottish materials. The pommel is made from Louisian gneiss from Iona. The scabbard is oak sourced from Perthshire. The hilt and crossguard form a swirling thistle motif. At the cost of £22,000 in taxpayer money, the Elizabeth Sword has stirred some controversy. But you have to admit it looks the part, and it really does exude Scottish pride and dignity. Together with her older siblings, the new sword resides in the Crown Room of Edinburgh Castle. You can also visit the Stone of Scone there, as well as some other fascinating treasures. So, it's been a bumpy road for sure, but it's incredibly gratifying that these objects have survived. They are in fact the oldest crown jewels in Britain. Their power to inspire has been understood for centuries. So, what does it say about such things that people are willing to risk their lives to defend them? Personally, I think it speaks to our innate desire for identity and for dignity. For ourselves, for sure, but more so for those who come after us. Symbols like the Honours of Scotland, on their own, are just pretty baubles. But the stories that they carry with them, if we work to remember them, can remind future generations of what mattered to us, and hopefully what will matter to them. Hey, thank you for joining me for this story. I hope you enjoyed hearing it as much as we enjoyed researching it. For more history like this, please check out the other videos on our channel, and while you're at it, I would very much appreciate it if you give us a like and a subscribe, and check out our retail space, usakilts.com. Have a fantastic day.